Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, and remember, Context is Everything Media Network. Founder and CEO John Michael, doing the ambient classroom where I read this textbook cover to cover. Today, I'm not going to be reading from the textbook though, because it is review day for Chapter 12. Chapter 12, which is on ancient Africa up until about the 1650s. So let's start with Chapter 12, Section 1, Early Civilizations of Africa. Here's a review of the entire chapter, starting with Section 1 of Chapter 12, Early Civilizations of Africa. Africa's largest and most populated climate zone is the savanna, or grassy plain, which stretches north and south of the forest zone, which is located on the equator and compiles about 5% of the African landmass. Deserts include the Sahara, which is the largest desert in the world, and is undergoing continued desertification every year, meaning the desert is growing every year, as of 2001, when this textbook was written. In the north, that's where the Sahara is. In the south, there is the Kalahari and the Namib deserts. Mineral resources spurred early trade among various African regions. Salt, gold, iron, copper were particularly valuable in early trade. Diamonds, oil, and cobalt would gain importance in time. Over thousands of years, migrations contributed to the rich diversity of people and culture in Africa. West African farmers and herders migrated to the south and east between 1000 BC and 1000 AD. West African people spoke a variety of languages that derived from a common root language known as Bantu. This ancient kingdom of Nubia, the ancient kingdom of Nubia, also called Kush, was located in present-day Sudan. Nubia had a long-standing conflict with their neighbors in Egypt. They did take from Egyptian style, but also needed to fight off those Egyptians on multiple occasions. Oddly, being the smaller nation, Nubia, around 750 BC, they conquered Egypt under King Pianki. Nubian King Pianki conquered Egypt. For a century, the Nubian kings ruled Egypt, but they could not stand up to the iron weapons of the invading Assyrians. I thought that iron was one of the major exports. Well, let's find out when that occurred. The iron become a major export. Furnaces of Meroe, M-E-R-O-E, with two dots over top it. The Nubian capital of Meroe commanded both the north and south Nile route and the east-west route from the Red Sea to the Savannah and North Africa. Meroe was rich in iron ore, with furnaces fueled by large quantities of timber. Meroe was able to produce iron after 500 BC, with furnaces fueled by fire. Now there's like piles of iron in ruins. They're like, oh, there's all this raw iron. How strange. Near the furnaces in the ruins. Nubians created their own system of writing with an alphabet rather than hieroglyphics. We still have not deciphered this language till this day. Till 2001. Maybe we have since. In 350 AD, armies of the kingdom of Axum on the Red Sea overwhelmed Nubia. King Izana of Axum leveled Nubian cities and took their valuable natural resources. Axum will be important as we move forward. Carthage, founded by Phoenician traders, Carthage came to dominate trade in the western Mediterranean and North Africa between 800 and 146 BC. It forged an empire that stretched from the Maghreb, which is present-day Tunisia, Algeria, and Morocco, to Spain, Sicily, with outposts in France and England. Yeah, that's section 1. Section 1 of chapter 12. Let's go to section 2 of chapter 12. Section 2 of chapter 12. Section 2 of chapter 12. Ancient kingdoms of West Africa. Can you hear that? Ice cream truck, even though it's raining and cold. Trade of valuable natural resources. Again, this is chapter 12.2, Ancient Kingdoms of West Africa. Trade of valuable natural resources was profound mover of society in Africa. Timbuktu stood at one end of trade network that reached north to Cairo, then across the Mediterranean Sea to Italy. Cairo is where the pyramids are, the Great Pyramid of Giza and the other ones, as well as the Sphinx. Between 800 and 1600 AD, several powerful kingdoms in turn won control of the prosperous Sahara trade. Among the richest of these West African states were Ghana, Mali, and Songhai. Let's talk about all of them. Trading gold and salt. Gold and salt dominated Sahara trade. Gold was plentiful in present-day Ghana, Nigeria, and Senegal. Gold dust was stuffed into hollow feather quills for safe travel to markets in North Africa. How interesting is that image of these feather quills with gold dust in them? And they did this so that it wouldn't be so evident and obvious for the traveling tradesmen, merchants, that they had gold, which I'm assuming was valuable back then just as it is now. But let's hear a strange thing about the valuation of gold comparatively to salt. In return for gold, West Africans received salt. People need salt in their diet to prevent dehydration, especially in hot tropical areas. The Sahara had an abundance of salt. A block of salt was easily worth its weight in gold at this time. Weird. Ghana, land of gold. By 800 AD, the rulers of the Soninke people had united many farming villages to create the Kingdom of Ghana, located in the broad V made up by the Niger and Senegal rivers. From there, the king controlled gold and salt trade routes across West Africa. The capital of Ghana was Kumbi Saleh, made up of two separate walled towns. The first town was dominated by royal palace, surrounded by a complex of domed buildings. To the people, the king was a semi-divine figure who dispensed justice and kept order. In the second town of Kumbi Saleh, prosperous Muslim merchants from the north of the Sahara lived in luxurious stone buildings. Over time, Ghana was swallowed up by rising new powers in West Africa, and this kingdom went by the name of Mali, M-A-L-I. The Kingdom of Mali. By 1235, Sundiata crushed his enemies, won control of the gold trade routes, and founded the Empire of Mali. The greatest Mali emperor was Mansa Musa, who came to the throne about 1312. He expanded Mali's borders westward to the Atlantic Ocean and pushed northward to conquer many cities. Mansa Musa presided over very safe cities and converted to Islam himself. His justice system was based off of the Quran, but he allowed women to go veilless, so not wearing the veil with only the eyes showing. He allowed them to go veilless and to also leave their homes without their husband's, what would you call it, presence, without him being with her, which I think in whatever, doesn't matter. That's what it says. That's what the textbook says. So, by 1400s, Timbuktu had become a leading center of learning in the Kingdom of Mali and drew some of the best scholars from all over the Muslim world. The new empire of Songhai. Songhai grew up on the bend of the Niger River in present-day Niger and Burkina Faso. Between 1464 and 1492, the soldier king Soni Ali used his powerful arm to forge the largest state that had ever existed in West Africa, bringing trade routes to the wealthy cities like Timbuktu under his control. The next emperor, Askia Muhammad, set up a Muslim dynasty and further expanded the territory and improved government by setting up a bureaucracy with separate departments for farming, the army, and the treasury. Interesting. Songhai prospered until 1586, when disputes over succession led to civil war. Soon after, the ruler of Morocco sent his armies south to seize West African gold mines. The invaders used gunpowder, weapons, and defeated the disunited forces of Songhai. Other kingdoms of West Africa from 500 to 1500 AD. Walled cities of the Hausa. By the 1300s, the Hausa had built a number of clay-walled cities. Kano was the most prosperous Hausa city-state. Its walls, 14 miles in circumference, protected a population of more than 30,000 people. Many Hausa rulers were women, such as Amina of Zaria. In the 1500s, Amina of Zaria conquered Kano. And I'll say it for a third time, this would be a good name for a movie if somebody would like to make a movie with a strong female lead. Amina of Zaria, conquers Kano. No, I guess you don't need the colon. Amina of Zaria conquers Kano. That's a great name for a movie. It would do marginally well. Definitely in some sort of exploitative form, because it is based off of, no, it's not exploitative. It's history. Enough of this nonsense. It's a good idea. It's a good idea for a history movie. I think that Disney should pay me exorbitant sums of money to make it. But if I were to be paid exorbitant sums of money to do something just like that, I think it would negatively affect me on a deeper level. Okay. Forest Kingdom of Benin. The forest peoples carved out farming villages and traded pepper, ivory, and later slaves to the neighbors in the savannah. In the 1300s, Benin organized their kingdom building off of the achievements of earlier forest cultures. An Oba, or king, was both a political and religious leader. Still much power was spread among other figures, including Queen Mother and Council of Hereditary Chiefs. The Oba's palace was decorated with elaborate brass plaques and sculptures. Benin sculptors developed their own unique style for representing the human face and form in their bronze and brass styles. Okay, on to the next section. Section 3 of Chapter 12. Section 3 of Chapter 12, Trade Routes of East Africa. Axum, we mentioned in the first section. Axum extended from the mountains of present-day Ethiopia to the shores of the Red Sea. The people of Axum were the descendants of African farmers and from traders who brought Jewish religious traditions through Arabia. This merging of cultures introduced another religion to Axum. It also gave rise to a unique written and spoken language of G's, G, E, E, Z. From 200 BC to 400 AD, Axum commanded triangular trade network that connected Africa to India by way of Arabian Sea and the Mediterranean world. Axum markets offered iron, spices, and precious stones. In 350 AD, Axum conquered and absorbed the ancient Nile kingdom of Nubia. In the 300s, Axum's great king, Ezana, converted to Christianity. In the 600s, Islam began spreading across Africa. This isolated Axum from important trade networks. Soon, civil war and economic decline combined to weaken Axum, and the kingdom slowly declined. Ethiopia. According to Ethiopian traditions, the first emperor of Ethiopia was the son of the Israelite king Solomon and his bride, Makeda. Ethiopia has remained a Christian state until the present day, with Coptic Christian Church dominating. Protected by rugged mountains, descendants of the Axumites were able to maintain their independence for centuries. During the 1200s, Christian monks built a number of remarkable churches. They were carved into solid rock of mountains. And according to Ethiopian chronicles, the builders had divine help. One group of Ethiopians practiced Judaism rather than Christianity. These Ethiopian Jews, known as the Falasha, survived in the mountains of Ethiopia until recent years, when they were evacuated to Israel during a famine. West African city-states. While Axum declined, a string of commercial cities, Kilwa, Mogadishu, Mombasa, and Sofala, gradually rose along the East African coast. Since ancient times, Phoenicians, Greeks, and Romans and Indian traders have visited this coast. Port cities, as well as offshore islands like Lamu, Zanzibar, were ideally located for trade with Asia. They're hammering nails downstairs again. That's all right. That's something that needs to happen. Work is work. On the East African coast, many rulers saw the advantages of encouraging trade. Ivory, leopard skin, iron, copper, pearls, and gold from the interior of Africa, as well as from the coastal regions. From India, Southeast Asia, and China came cotton, cloth, silk, spice, porcelain, china, glassware, and swords. A thriving slave trade also developed. Both private houses and palaces show strong Arab and Middle Eastern influence in the East African cities. Additionally, the blend of cultures gave rise to a new language. Known as Swahili, it fused many Arabic words into a Bantu base and was written in Arabic script. Great Zimbabwe didn't have a lot of information on Great Zimbabwe. They said, we don't really know anything about Great Zimbabwe a few times in the textbook. Today, the impressive ruins are all that remain of Great Zimbabwe. This city was built by a Bantu-speaking peoples who settled in the region between 900 and 1500 AD. Great Zimbabwe was part of a trade network that reached across the Indian Ocean. By the 1500s, Great Zimbabwe was in decline as Portuguese traders were pushing inland to find gold, and though they failed in finding their source of gold, their intrusion helped undermine smaller states in East Africa. Okay, and now that was chapter 12, section 3. This is chapter 12, section 4, and this is the last section of the chapter. So after this, I'll bid you adieu, and we will reconvene tomorrow for chapter 13, which is the spread of civilizations in East Asia between 500 and 1650 AD. Okay. Chapter 12, section 4. Notes. Peoples and traditions of Africa. Over thousands of years, Bantu-speaking people migrated across Africa. With them, they carried farming skills and knowledge of ironworking to its many regions. Bantu migrations pushed many hunting and gathering peoples to Africa's fringe areas. The Khoisan people, for example, adapted to harsh conditions in the Kalahari Desert by gathering roots and herbs and hunting small game. Hunting and gathering people lived in small bands numbering about 20 or 30 people. They could track animals across long distances and identify the foods that had healing properties from many different plants. Settled farming societies implemented a method that is now called slash-and-burn agriculture. They cleared a forest and brush land with iron axes and hoes, then burned the remains, using the ash for fertilizer. Because the land lost its fertility within a few years, villagers would move on to clear other land. Eventually, after giving soil some time to renew its fertility, they might return to abandoned fields. Here's some forms of government. Villages have often made decisions by a process known as consensus. In open discussion, people whose opinions were valued voiced their views in a general agreement until a general agreement was reached. That's consensus. People with valued voices would talk amongst a group until a consensus agreement was reached by the folks in the room. The opinions of elder men and women usually held the greatest weight. The Kingdom of Congo, which flourished from 1507 in about 1500 in Central Africa, consisted of many villages grouped into districts and provinces and governed by officials appointed by the king. Each village had its own chief, a man chosen on the basis of the descent of his mother's family. The king was chosen by a board of electors and had to govern according to traditional laws. Kings of Congo could only call upon their armies in times of need, and through local governors, the king collected taxes either in goods or in cowrie shells, which was an African currency. Family patterns. In patrilineal culture, a bride would move in with her husband's village to become a part of his family. In matrilineal cultures, the husband joined his wife's family. Each family belonged to lineage or group of households who claimed a common ancestor. Several lineages formed a clan that traced its descent to an even more remote and often legendary ancestor. An individual's place in society was also determined by a system of age grades. An age grade included all girls and boys born in the same year. Each age grade had particular responsibilities and privileges. In the older age grades, children began to take part in village activities which created social ties beyond the family. Religious beliefs. Africans worshipped many gods and goddesses. They identified forces of nature with divine spirits and tried to influence those forces through rituals and ceremonies. Many African peoples believed that a single unknowable supreme being stood above all other gods and goddesses. This supreme being was the creator and ruler of the universe and was helped by the lesser spirits who were closer to the people. Like the Chinese, many African people believed that spirits of their ancestors could help warn or punish their descendants on Earth. African converts to Islam and Christianity often associated the god of Christians and Muslims with their traditional supreme being. In this way, Christianity and Islam absorbed many local practices and beliefs. Arts and literature. Artisans created words of art in ivory. Bronze, what? Artisans created words of art in ivory, wood, bronze, woven with dyed cloth, inscribed with jugs and bowls, and bracelets and neck ornaments. I'm not sure what I mean by that. Art was closely tied to religion. Statues and other objects were used in religious ceremonies. In many rituals, leaders wore impressively carved wooden masks decorated with cowrie shells or grass. Once the mask was in place, the wearer and the viewers could feel the presence of the spiritual force it represented. Ancient Egypt, Nubia, and Axum left written records of their past. Oral traditions in West Africa were carried on by griots, or professional poets, and followers, and it followed forms similar to Homer and Aryan Indian stories. They were passed down from generation to generation. Folk tales, which blended fanciful stories with humor and sophisticated wordplay, taught important moral lessons. The moral of the story is, Context is Everything Media Network, founder and CEO John Michael. I hope you have a wonderful day and enjoy the acid rain. Bye. Bye-bye.